Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining yet another episode of Let's Talk Cloud. If the live demo gods and streaming gods are with us, this is all working correctly from the appearance of everything. We are live on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Twitter. You can comment and join the discussion there with the hashtag Let's Talk Cloud. As always, we've got a great team behind the scenes who are monitoring that chat so that we can make this a very interactive discussion and bring your thoughts into this discussion and this show. With us today is a very, very special treat. We have a phenomenal guest, Patrick Desbois, who is, I don't even know how to describe his impact on our community. He is the co-author of the DevOps Handbook. He is the director of DevOps Relations at Sneak. He is one of the, if not the originator of the actual term DevOps. Let's welcome Patrick to the show. Patrick, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm glad I could be on a webinar again, right?
I heard you haven't done one in a long time, so I thought, why not?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. What everything security related, I'm up for it. So
Good. So, in the intro, I mentioned, because I was doing some research for this, obviously I read this phenomenal book when it came out, the DevOps Handbook. It is amazing. We will touch on this in a little bit. But one of the things that popped up was a very interesting Wikipedia reference from, I didn't check the English. It was somehow I was surfing the French Wikipedia, and it cites you with originating the term DevOps. Is that accurate?
it's accurate and it might not be accurate. So it depends on how you see things,
Okay.
right? I was already working in 2009 around Agile in general, doing Agile infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
But then I saw a talk by John Allspaw and Hammond around how Dev and Ops collaborated at Etsy, right? So, but that just had a slide, Dev loves Ops, right?
Yes.
And then I wanted to do a conference, and I called it, I wanted to give it a name, and I said, what about Agile System Administrator Days? That's just going to be too long. I was like, how about DevOps Days? And then, so the term was coined by accident, like many things in my life.
Yeah.
But that's the original story, how we got to the name. And then after the first conference, I didn't even knew it was a thing until somebody wrote a blog post. What is this DevOps thing anyway?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it kind of took off to the world. And that's, now my kids are like, hey, what's this DevOps thing? So
Which
it's
is
that
crazy,
old.
right? And I mean, that's absolutely crazy, but that's how most of this stuff kind of happens, right? It's good intentions and it just starts to pick up. But and I think that's very credible as far as you're the originator of the term. So as one of the originators, obviously as one of the key influencers in the community to this day, a decade plus later, I'm going to ask you the worst question in DevOps, which is, what is DevOps?
DevOps is the way I explain it to my kids when they were younger. Is when you're at a playground and you have to play nice with somebody else on the playground. That is DevOps, right? and and then obviously in company terms, it's the developer working with the ops group, because there was this throw over the wall mentality. I say was, there probably still is in many places. And then I think later it expanded more to looking at the company as a system, more in systems thinking, that the different groups got to align themselves to kind of achieve the business goal better. So whether that is dev, that's ops, that's sec, and in some of my latest talk, I said like sales has to be aligned, marketing has to be aligned, HR, legal, everybody's working towards this collaboration, and whatever one of these groups does or doesn't has an impact on all the other groups. So for me, that is kind of the essence of achieving this result by playing nice with other people in your company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that really That's an excellent answer, and also the vagueness of this answer kind of expresses the philosophy, right? Of that, the analogy I think is really the key part is playing nice with others, right? Working towards that common goal. So you had a ton of experience in the agile community. In fact, that's how you explained you came up with the term. And you've seen this transition for agile to now into the DevOps philosophy and the movement. What's the biggest surprise you think you've seen being involved with this for 20 plus years?
Um, Reading a blog that said, "Can Agile and DevOps work together?" That was a big surprise. And you
What?
can Google that. Those blogs exist, right? Like they are two separate things somehow. And that was kind of a surprise in the way that, so I understand in the beginning, Agile was already, they were pushing for more stable software delivery as the artifact delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting at a conference and then listening to David Anderson, who coined like Kanban
Yep.
for development teams to pick that up. And he said like, "Oh, how works the workflow?" And I remember saying in the like raising my hand, How about the ops group?" And he said like, "Good luck." So I remember those words from him. But the fact that the thinking kind of extended in Agile, that the lines are blurring. So a lot of the developers are taking over some of the practices, and continuous integration went to continuous delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole pipeline got kind of part of the development. Yet Agile, if you look at it as an ecosystem, kind of stayed not completely separate, but not enough integrated to the DevOps community.
Mm-hmm.
They're still seen as two different kind of communities where people think about aspects of the differences.
Mm-hmm.
I think Agile in general is strong-headed. They move way more to the business side in a way that they will be more looking at, okay, what does it mean to get the business involved?
Yeah.
Where DevOps talks about this value, but it's probably closer to the user aspect. Like, how can we make it more stable? How can we make it more functional in a way? There's some truth in the middle, but that are like, I would have hoped to have them kind of almost like better integrated, that it will be like, what's the next big thing of DevOps? And I would usually say Agile, right?
Yeah.
And then people would look confused but that's kind of the idea, that these two worlds somehow would merge together.
Yeah, and I think your point about agile being closer to the business while DevOps is closer to the user is a really important one. When some people may be like, "Well, aren't those the same things?" And they're definitely not. Like they can overlap, but that's two sides of the same coin. But if you're never crossing the side, or maybe two sides of the same river and there's no bridge, is probably more accurate. But I think that's a really important point, especially I find it interesting the parallel of how agile has changed in its definition somewhat over the years, and it's sort of hazy because if you say agile to people who've seen it go across, we have a very different idea than somebody else who's like, it's Scrum, and you're like, well, no, it's more than that. It's not just one little thing. But there are definitely parallels there, and yet that's still gaps. So I was writing down that DevOps and Agile, can they coexist title, because I'll add those into the show notes. And for the audience, just so you guys know, everything we reference here, we'll put in the show notes so that you guys can find those links really, really easy. And the team will drop the show's URL in LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Twitter as well, so you guys can get those references. Because there's going to be a ton of stuff. I know just based on having spoken to Patrick before and seeing his content, we're going to bring up a lot of weird stuff probably today. It's good to have links so you can check it out later on. Yeah. So it's interesting as a surprise. So I want to bring back another parallel that I saw, again, researching this stuff. So one of the things I saw was, you got to love everything living on the internet. And, I think we got started around the same kind of time online. But you were way more advanced than I was, I think, off the bat, because I found a reference to you in an academic paper from 1994 on project work you had done around web indexing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was amazing. Very cool to have a reference in an academic paper from Adorf, and again in the show notes, the links there for the PDF. This person had gone through and looked at how people were accessing resources online in the mid '90s because it was the Wild West, right? Pre-Google days. For those of you in the audience,
Pre-Yahoo days,
yeah.
right?
For those of you in the audience, yes, there was a time before Google existed and indexed everything on the planet. But what I found interesting is looking at the parallel of you were tackling that problem of finding discovering resources and helping people find them, through it was URL Haven, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah. Good research, Mark.
I try. You come on the show with a big name. I gotta hold up my side of this, right? But I was in my mind when I was reading it, I was drawing parallels to the challenges we're having now as a result of changing how we develop and pushing into microservices, where enterprises are having a hard time discovering the resources they've already got built within their organization, right? And it's funny because I talk to these teams and like, oh yeah, we got a great microservice design, and you hear the services they've built, and you talk to another team in the same org, and they've built same resources a lot of the time. There's a lot of overlap. Have you found that to be the true for your experience as well? What do you think about service discovery in the modern age here?
Yeah, I think it obviously depends a little bit on your size, of your company. But the bigger you get, obviously the number of people you can talk to or the teams that you're working with, they have that problem. And I think what also ties into that is the fact that we're giving teams the freedom to use whatever tool they deem necessary, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of this empowering of the team, but then it might go somewhere in this tool spread somehow of things that are using. And that whether that's a tool or a service that is somewhere in your company, or, and then especially, for example, if you're all remote, like you don't even met all the people, you don't even know what they're using all day long, and then the whole time you're just discovering, oh, A from department B is doing this, and they're using this cool tool, and all of a sudden you have like 15 tools for analytics, 15 tools for CRM, 15 tools for monitoring your systems. I can't recall the name, but the other day when I was researching vulnerability scanning tools, there was a tool that basically aggregated the results of all the tools to make sure that whatever was marked in one tool as we got that wasn't surfacing again in the other tool. Yeah. So that is probably a different spread, but it just reminded me of the fact that there can be so many things going on, and this kind of overview is something you need, but just automatically discovering things, I've never seen that work perfectly, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and to your point then, I've never seen a search engine index correctly without having some of the top curation as well. So there's always like some automation aspect and some kind of human aspect that drives both things. I think Google understood that pretty well, by clicks and then, surfacing stuff and then discovering new things, but not enough new things. So yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. So
okay. And that brings up a lot of stuff that I want to dive into, but there's one more question on the dev side that I want to talk about before we dive into your security journey here. And that was, reviewing again, I'll just keep holding it up because this is an excellent book. And if you haven't read this yet, you need to read this front to back. So
can I tell you a secret, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't read it back to back.
I think that's fair, given that you wrote a big chunk of it along with Jez and John and Gene. I think that's okay.
I did most of the talking. They did the writing. And that's how I got on the book somehow.
That sounds like the best.
I definitely know like loads of the stories because we've been chatting for so long.
Yeah.
Actually, my kids sometimes joke the fact in my calendar, they would say, "Is it Gene Kim time again?" And they knew it was kind of a new session of just discussing all these things. So, but yeah, the book's great. I get a lot of feedback from people saying this is a consistent work. which is kind of hard to find in our field.
Yeah, yeah.
There are many books that also relate more to the tooling side, but I think they're sometimes quite volatile because it isn't conceptually. And this kind of ties in nicely in a consistent that brings all the threads together that we've been discussing for years. So
yeah, and I love the fact that it's somewhat timeless in that it's not like this is referring to Chef version 1.2.3, right? You're talking about the workflow, about the process, about the principles behind it. And that was what I wanted for this question was one of the key principles here in building continuous delivery and building out your pipeline is that of the and chord, right? The ability for somebody to stop the deployment and stop the build if there's a problem so that you can go back and fix it. It's pretty well accepted. Most teams are deploying that, who are adopting the DevOps philosophy. But what I wanted to ask you, given your experience, how do you get people over that hump of being comfortable in actually yanking the cord? Because I know, especially with a lot of junior folks who are this their first time maybe, and there's a lot of the perceived stigma or concern about pulling it when the idea is when in doubt stop and pull the cord to make sure that things don't blow up. What's been your experience kind of introducing that concept or helping people get over that psychological hurdle?
yeah, I think there's the first hurdle that everybody has is that it won't be me, like you say. I don't want to be the person who blocks the whole thing. So I've seen companies kind of shift that around in a way that they look at it as a positive thing. If you find something, you're like almost like celebrated that you brought something to the table. In the beginning of the process, usually it's a little bit stop and go.
Yeah.
If you want to have people do that, and you have to really make sure that there isn't a fatigue of, oh yeah, we're down again, and oh, we're up again. So I wouldn't usually start doing it without having a little bit more of a maturity that some of the tests are kind of caught more automatically,
Okay.
because otherwise it will just be different. So I'll typically start out with maybe the team writing tests and understanding why the tests are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Still going a little bit to a QA, but that could be a group QA. Okay. Instead of saying this is something that we do continuously. And then when that kind of flow is getting better and better, then we're if somebody says stop, it's probably worth the stop. But if you would immediately say stop all the time, I think it's creating some fatigue.
Yep.
And I rather do that in a group. And it only makes sense if you have some maturity in your process. That's something people forget. It's like to reach the continuous delivery, it requires a lot of time and maturity for the team to pick up skills and things to do. I know they're always so eager. How can we go in 5 days to continuous delivery? And it might work if all the team members have experienced that and they're on the same page. But looking at one of the canonical examples with Etsy, that was like 4 or 5 years their journey. Yeah. Netflix didn't have that from the start. So like everybody has to build this up somehow with the team. I remember being on my previous company, we were checking out Git code on production, right? Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be doing it, but it took me almost like a year and a half to get the team into writing tests that they needed. Yeah. Not because I asked them, but because it was useful. Mm-hmm. And because they were committed, because it was, they were on kind of on call. So they knew when they changed things that was important to do. So that commitment and that reason to do it is half the battle, I guess. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that brings up a really good point. I'm going to pull that up on screen right now. I showed you this before we jumped on. Unfortunately, you can't see it on the stream yourself, but this is a table from a talk you gave in 2014, so 6 years ago, that showed a maturity model of intro, novice, intermediate, advanced, and insane, which I love, for organizations as they're going towards continuous integration. When I was digging through this, what surprised me, well, it surprised me, but it shouldn't have surprised me, was that how closely this aligns with the maturity model we see in the State of DevOps report from DORA every year for the last few years, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things that people forget. And what you just hit on repeatedly was that the tech side is pretty simple. Like you can set up the tech side of a pipeline relatively easily with a bunch of services. You know, you get your code repo, you got your test runner, you got the deployment. Like that's not hard. It's the mental side, the cultural side of the team to get through these stages, to understand that, you know, and we saw this at Trend Micro ourselves. I was part of our initial transformation years ago, where we went from deploying, you know, enterprise software, we ship it to customers, big version every year with updates throughout the year, to continuous delivery on a service. And even there, a few years in, I mean, we're 6 years into that transformation for that team. And they're still, you know, basically they deploy once every 2 weeks, I think, once every week, 2 weeks, which for them works great. And they're meeting customer demands, but it took years to get to that point. So with that maturity model in mind, you know, I think a lot of people can get out of intro into sort of the middle pretty easily, but it takes a lot of effort to get over that hump of sort of the mid-range up into the advanced or sort of experts. What do you think the key is there? What's your experience of those teams who, you know, they got the basics? How do they get truly to that next level? You know, the Etsy's, the Netflix, the Flickrs way back in the day, being able to do that continuously, you know, and deploy multiple times per day, roll back, you know, fix things, move forward, whatever they need to do. How do they get to that elite level?
So one process that helped me pretty well was the first thing is kind of build almost like the value stream or the mapping of everything that's going on, right? So making it like the system visible is one thing, but making it a shared understanding across everybody is another. So that's usually an exercise I do is like, okay, write everything you know about the system on the board, like put every piece that you know, and then lo and behold, there's going to be these two pieces nobody knew, or the one thing everybody knew, but what, like the documentation server went down, or all these kind of things. And then once you mapped it out, you start thinking, okay, where do things go down frequently? Right? And you start looking for your bottleneck on the system. And then you start saying, okay, if we, like you look at the larger bottlenecks that pretty surface from your ticketing system or from any fires you noted down. And then you said, well, you know, they might be at 2 on a scale of 10. How can we get them to 5, right? Not to a 10, but I usually make and I might be lost in translation here. If you have a barrel of water, right, there's this sides in wood that has been made up. If one of those sides is broken, the water will flow out through the lowest side, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll kind of have to, each of those sides probably level up, you know, part by part, instead of going, oh, I'm going to do all this automation because that's fantastic, or I'm going to go all in with system A. It's kind of this gradual approach that builds the fort and kind of levels things up. And then it's more and more going to be not a technical discussion, then it's going to be a priority discussion, pulling the business in, evaluating risks of the things you're doing, and kind of work on that. But in generally, the guidance, where's your next bottleneck, and have consensus on that and work on that, is actually the simplest process that there is. It's something I described, like I mentioned before, in my previous company, we had the tech all working, and where was our bottleneck? In sales, right? In hiring people. And it's just so simple if you look at that from a higher perspective, and you don't stay in your local optimization, whether it's in your team, in your personal interest or whatever, but you start looking at the system, what needs improvement. So that'll be my general advice on doing that.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It reminds me of, the water analogy works really, really well. What I always find funny is like the bodybuilder, the gym muscle heads who all they ever do is bench press. And then you ask them to do something simple, in the real world and they can't do it because they've overdeveloped just one set of muscles and haven't worried about the rest of themselves. And, we see that in teams all the time where you get really, crackerjack side of like one or two engineers who are, the best at one thing, but they ignore everything else. And it's like, well, I can't have 100% in one thing. I need, I'd rather have 40% across the board because we'd actually be better off as a team. But that brings me to something you tweeted out this week, because I know you have been, I appreciate you taking the time for this stream because let's just say you're a tiny bit busy with something right now. I think that's, the world's biggest understatement. Let me pull up the page for it actually first. So I'll give you the quick intro, or maybe you want to give it, but you're the engine behind Sneaks hosting this new conference, All the Talks Online. You want to give us a little 30 seconds on what it is?
Basically, it's for people sitting at home that were bummed not to get content, although that's not true anymore. But it's going to be about DevOps, DevSecOps, security, Java, JavaScript. And we're doing this conference for a good cause. All donations go to the World Health Organization. So part of watching the talks and raising money and learning things. I think that's like the 30-second or 35-second or 37-second right now episode of that.
Perfect. And so I've been following along on Twitter, trying to help out when I can, because you've been tweeting out various requests for software for different things. What I pulled up on the stream right now is something you were just talking about on getting those teams sort of the elite level, is your list that you tweeted out of possible failures for this conference, because obviously you've got speakers, you've got the audience, there is a ton of things that you're trying to connect here, so many moving parts and sort of first time. So I didn't want to dive into this because I didn't want to make you sad. But what I thought is a really good public example of that process you just talked about, of walking through, okay, I'm doing this, what could go wrong? Where's the bottleneck? Where is the issue? What could be a problem? So instead of going line by line, maybe you just walk us through your process of, you've got a small team, I hope, helping you. This is all, this is not building, you're stitching together a whole bunch of stuff. Why going through this? What's the goal here?
Well, the rationale is that a lot of the streaming solutions actually exist for people who are doing it with a production team on a single location, and on a location that has a stable internet connection, and that it is only run for a couple of hours. So we're running for 24 hours on a live stream with 3 tracks, so that's 3 times a live stream, with people across the globe or all sitting at home with crappy internet, right? So we can't depend on my computer to stream things out. We need somebody to take over if they have to, and the same thing with the guests if the guests aren't available. So all these failure modes, and whether that's the streaming side for YouTube, they put on their website, there might be some irregularities. So better think of an alternative. So we got Mixer as an alternative, and the other day when I tweeted that out, I was testing because we're one of the options was obviously using Zoom to stream things in, and usually stream works fine and everybody's happy. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't hit the live stream button on Zoom for 4 hours, and that meant we couldn't have any guests. So we need a backup solution for onboarding guests. And it just the list keeps going on the alternatives, but I think it's finding a balance between having non-professional streamers running the show, being able to do a handover and not having to rely on a central point or a central system in case that goes wrong. And that's kind of been a challenge. I've tested quite a few tools and also quite a few platforms, and they are pro and cons. Like I didn't know, we had the .online domain. That is another funny story. So I learned through some people tweeting me back, or not tweeting me back, that the .online domain is actually blocked by some URL blockers.
Yeah.
And I did a test on Twitter where I tweeted the all the talks handle together with a .online URL, and it wouldn't show up for somebody else because Twitter just would filter that out.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains why I wasn't getting any retweets on stuff
Yep.
that sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. And like online wasn't, again, it's one of those things you learn by doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's a good segue into where I want to go next here with the conversation. But I think, just to wrap that up, what I really want people to take away from your failure mode doc there is that, this is just a straight spreadsheet. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's the process. It's you walking through this stuff that's really important to map it out. You don't need a fancy database tool. Like, just writing it down on the whiteboard or in a spreadsheet is good enough, because it's the thought that really does count when it comes to that. But in the good way, not in the like, oh, it's nice you failed completely, but the thought counts. Like, you don't want to fail.
We'll see next week, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be great. It is absolutely going to be great. But the .online thing actually comes out to what I wanted to talk about, and where we first had our actual first in-person conversation was way back in February. You tweeted out the I'm getting some transparency there, so you can see it a little faded on the stream. But basically, you'd called out asking to talk to some CISOs and red teamers about security. Right, because you have a long history on the development side, on Agile, on DevOps, helping build the rest of the business, and security is always somewhat excluded, mostly of our own doing. But what I wanted to kind of, and that was the title of this episode, finding security. I really want to hear your experience coming from that such a strong development side, such a strong business side, starting your first journey into security, formally kind of thing, and doing that research. What'd you find?
I found that the problem isn't new, right? Surprise, surprise. So I guess there's two things. There's the people who say, why do we need to have DevSecOps? Because security was always included in the discussion, right? So for them, they might be on a higher maturity level. So for them, it's the lines have blurred, so they don't care too much. For others, being, if you start out only from the security community, I found that they have the same feeling as Dev and Ops had a while ago. Like, nobody understands us, and then we keep preaching to everybody, but nobody wants to listen to us, and we want them to care about us. So it is the same kind of adagio that is counter. What is less counted for, and I started doing this exercise when people from the security told me, oh, so devs should do this and ops should do that, and I'm good. Like, yeah, they should totally do that. And then I asked them, and why would they do that? Because they care. No, it just doesn't happen magically. Yeah. So this answer of we want somebody else to do something for us, but we haven't listened what they get back from it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of something I missed in a lot of the conversations I had responding to that tweet again, somebody said, well, security people will never respond to that tweet because it's all hush hush. Truth is, kind of several people responded to it. So that's a good sign. Mm-hmm. And like the one group that I didn't expect to kind of reply to me was actually somebody from the Department of Defense.
Nice. Right?
Okay, so I'm not saying I got all the explanations of the Department of Defense, but they were saying, and that is an interesting thing. They said, like, well, we are actually running Kubernetes on fighter jets, and part of our pipeline is to make things faster and respond and making it more resilient. So that's something I kind of learned from that discussion. But the way I've seen it is that they want somebody else to do something. And for me, that whole discussion moved towards the discussion of trust. Do we trust the security person? Do we trust the dev person? Do we trust the ops person? Mm-hmm. Like, the devs want to trust the security person, but he wasn't very reliable because he wasn't there at the stand-up. He wasn't really helpful getting it to production. He was saying no.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a dance to be done by, if we want people to trust us, we want to become more trustworthy. And that is can be shown by being around more, talking to people, listening, making it good balance on what's important, what's priority, and not just looking at our own kind of, what we want to do and what we need to do. And that narrative is kind of changing. So there is a willingness to collaborate. And a good example for was threat modeling. They would say threat modeling, the security people have asked that for the developers, do that in the beginning, of every sprint and do that all the time.
Yeah.
But the value, they had a hard time articulating it, right? But for some developers, there is a value of learning the system. So for them, it's a fun exercise. But it is also, if you say at a personal level, become a better developer. But these are still kind of fluffy. If you say, well, you don't want to wake up in the middle of the night because of a security breach, and then if you come back to the devs almost being part of the ops now and running the show, then they have more ears to that. So it's kind of finding what the other group is kind of, and I want to stop calling them groups, but more like expertise.
Yeah.
So the same expertise can kind of go in one person or in one group, and it doesn't have to be a group separate. It could be a role somebody's playing, the role of security today, the ops person next day, developer the next day, and it isn't that much of the separation of these knowledge or responsibilities to go for. So.
And it's interesting that you say so there's a lot in there to unpack. There's a lot of fantastic stuff. As a primarily,
I should pause more. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's great. I love that just stream of thought. And as a security guy, I'm just sitting there going like, because I hear it and I understand. The first thing I wanted to tackle was that idea of groups, because I've done a lot of research over the last few years, specifically around security teams, and I think the fact that they are their own group causes a lot of these problems because they're constantly firefighting. They don't have time to attend the stand-ups. They don't have time to build that trust relationship, and it makes their own job harder, but they don't have enough time to get above water to look and go, wait a minute, we're not working towards our own goal here because we aren't investing in time in the relationships. So hearing that echoed from your side is, it's confirming it's still a massive problem. But the other thing that really stood out for me there was the explanation of the lack of explanations. So when you said to the security person saying, we need you to do this, but there was no support to it as to why was it a good thing? And I find that a lot purely in the security world as well, where they're recommending things or requiring things by rote without understanding what the trade-offs are, right? So you absolutely have to encrypt everything all the time. While in an ideal world, it would be nice. There are trade-offs there. There's performance, there's complexity, there's potentially cost, but not being able to articulate that is really difficult to get people on board when you think you have some sort of trump card that just says, well, you need to do what I said. And did you see that? So can you elaborate a little more on what you found, what you got the impression of sort of the personality profile was from the security relationship?
Well,
like just as far as the attitudes kind of thing?
Yeah, the attitude is actually, again, no different from all the others. Like, I know my domain best, right?
Yeah.
Which is logical, but it kind of makes us almost like that. We say, well, we're better than the others, right? Mm-hmm. Because we know this better. We're better educated. Yeah. But guess what? The developers are better at coding, and the opsers are better at running stuff. So this ego has to kind of go away in the aspect, and the egos go away if you start collaborating. And I wanted to add to the point of, yes, there expertise and maybe more of a role or a hat that people are wearing. But one of the I think is an error people are making is that it has to be this this poor full stack secure developer, right? That has to know everything,
Yeah.
right? That is close to impossible. And tying back to you, all the things that happen in your organization, like we discussed before, like the discoverability, there is no way that you can know all the domains well.
Yeah.
So the only way of approaching it is that you understand enough when to ask for help.
Yes. Yeah, because the counter to that is if there is somebody who understands everything about all the systems, I guarantee you have found the number one bottleneck to your velocity, right? Because everything has to go through that person to make it work. And that doesn't fly. And, it may have worked in the 80s when we were building software, but it doesn't anymore, right? And I mean, I think it's a good thing to not know everything because it forces that collaboration as long as you accept that you don't know everything. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that that's one of the hardest things, right? Is to, from the engineering pride perspective, to be like, I don't know, I'll figure it out, or we'll find somebody who knows.
Yeah.
So
I think that even in hiring, sometimes they say a good hiring strategy is to hire people that know different or more things than you,
yeah,
because they take away worries,
yeah,
right?
it's a,
And that's kind of, you look at your whole team. Don't hire the same people with the same background, with the same knowledge, with the same attitudes. Like, we talk a lot about diversity, but it's in that domain as well
yeah.
applicable, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. You need diversity mentally, right, in that thought process. I remember long time ago, like 20 years ago, I was working for the Canadian federal government, and the hiring manager that I was talking to was like, yeah, I always hire people from this college program who have taken this, who get above this grade. And, we posed the question to him like, okay, well, aren't you hiring all the people who think the same way? Just because you've had success with one of them, that's great. And maybe a couple more, fine. But if you have an entire team of the same person, in a cookie cutter, you don't have any. You're very fragile. You don't have any resiliency, right? Because it's if something
Yeah.
comes outside of that person's scope, you're done.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the, so there's an upcoming book called Agile Conversations.
Okay.
And the nice thing about the book, and it's the only book I know, is actually addressing the person-to-person communication issues that we have within a business context. And they're saying, well, I want to get explain something to person B, but yeah, I already had my opinion. No, so it's like, how do I listen to the other person
Yeah.
and get better at, pushing my things maybe forward, but listening and that feedback. And that whole dance is like, a lot of people talk about DevOps as it has an impact on the organization, the team level, but I also think there's on the one-on-one connection between people, and that's it's the people that build the trust. And that's kind of where it becomes so important that we have the honest conversations about what we're really saying, what we really want, what we really need to do, and not just leave that in the open and say, well, we're gonna do it somewhere else. We're gonna go in the cloud, or we're gonna solve this with this service because the others aren't responding. And that is that listening to that feedback is again a sign of not being overconfident. Like,
Yeah.
help me understand, help me. This making ourselves vulnerable to feedback is again important. But I know for a lot of people it sounds like kumbaya, and it's so yeah, there is definitely something
Yeah,
to
but
be
it's
said. But
it's true, right? I mean, it's the technology. You can get an answer on the technology. This will work or this will not work, right? Or it'll work under these circumstances. But the vast majority of this hard work, really what you're talking about is listening with empathy and communicating with empathy to understand that, I have yet to hit an organization with very few exceptions where people are not trying to achieve the same goal. right? They're not trying to actively work against each other, but because they're not listening, because they're not communicating in each other's languages, or in terms that the other person, can understand, they end up in this combative situation. And you're like, you're trying to do the same thing, guys. Like maybe kumbaya, but it's really all about that empathy, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the debate has been within the DevOps community, and maybe specific, is about it's not about the tools,
Mm-hmm.
right? They kind of say it's all about the culture. I'm somewhere, but again, I'm more of a consensus figure, being from Belgium. But it's like I think the tools influence the people, and the people influence the tools. So I don't think you can see them separate from each other.
Yeah.
I think introducing a new tool can actually lead to a new mindset. It's not a guarantee, and that is what people mistake for. But the fact that you introduces change kind of maybe requires you to change the process. You're thinking about the problem, and that kind of makes a good relationship. I saw like John Osborne made a question to the audience at one of the conferences. He said, "What if you don't touch your systems for a day? Will they keep running?" Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, yeah, a day. Yeah. How about a week?" And you see the audience getting nervous, and they're like, "Okay, what about a month?" Right? And so that's the way he has proven that we are part of the system.
Yeah.
We are part of making it work, and it's not just the tools that are running. And I find that like a powerful analogy of understanding that there's some truth and interaction going on between both. So.
Yeah, and that ties to a really good comment we just had on YouTube around burnout, right? If you don't have that empathy component, people will burn out really, really quickly because the pressure just keeps mounting, especially with that idea of you need to do everything, right? You need to be completely full stack. And, it's, as much as it is cliche, it really is about the people, so I wanted to shift gears a little bit because this has been fantastic, but we're coming close to some time here. And I know you at some point are legally required to sleep before this conference next week. But we like to do a little section, just rapid fire questions. You got to pick one or the other. No explanations. We'll circle back. A little bit putting you on the spot for some stuff, but nothing career harming or dramatic. Yeah. Okay. So who do you think's harder to work with, finance or security folks?
I think security folks, actually.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike.
No, I get it. I sit here and I take it because I 100% agree. Okay, if you could only pick one, so you can only pick one of these: integration testing or blue-green deployments.
Blue-green deployments.
Okay. When we'll circle back to that in a sec. What's harder? Starting a movement that's transformed how hundreds of thousands of people work, aka DevOps, or organizing a 24-hour, 3-track online conference?
Definitely the conference.
That's insane. That is absolutely insane. All right. A little bit on the spot, especially if the other authors are listening. Best book in the series: Phoenix Project, DevOps Handbook, Accelerate, or the Unicorn Project?
I would say the Phoenix Project.
Okay, interesting. And because I saw you put an entire track in all the talks .online conference for Java, I'm going to ask you this one. What's the best candidate to displace Java, Go or Python?
I would go for Python.
Interesting. Okay, I got to ask, why Python?
Because Python is, well, my understanding is that the tooling around Python currently is in a higher evolved state than the Ghost language. I don't mean that Go isn't a good language, and I love it.
Yeah.
But it's like Java is enterprise, so it needs a little bit of maturity level, and I think Python gives that more than Go. That's my reasoning.
100% fair. 100% fair. Phoenix Project for your book selection, I assume, because it kicked it all off?
I think Phoenix Project explains the like, first of all, I like the narrative of the story that Gene has done there,
Yeah.
but I think it's shown the seeing the system better than the DevOps Handbook, which was kind of a lot more evolved. And I think the other one was everybody could read the Phoenix Project without doing that. So that's why I liked it better.
Yeah, and that lines up with my experience, where I highly recommend everyone in the technical side buy the book and read the book. In fact, at Trend, we did that for our entire engineering organization. We got them all the book, just to get them on the same page for the DevOps Handbook. But the Phoenix Project is the one that I recommend to anyone in the company. So it's like, oh,
there is a graphic novel of that.
Yes.
Which is also cool.
Yeah, and the audio series after and the conversations too. But yeah, I like that accessibility. I think that really, it explains because for the longest time, people think is IT as a cost sink, as something that, they have to put up with. And the Phoenix Project really explains that, like, hey, we're trying to move things forward. Here's the challenges. Here's where we're going in the future. And I really like that accessibility. So last question for you, easy one, hopefully. Because this has been fantastic. I very much appreciate you taking the time, anytime, let alone in the midst of organizing all the talks. Picture yourself 2 weeks after the conference. So the conference is April 15th. Again, the link is in the show notes. Sign up. It is free to attend, but a donation is highly recommended. And again, the donations are going to the WHO, right?
Yes, correctly.
Perfect.
Yeah, so, and sponsors also still welcome. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, full disclaimer, Trend Micro is one of the sponsors, but all that means is that we get our logo and we're donating money to the WHO as well. Everybody absolutely should come together in this difficult time. But personally, for you, you've been going crazy organizing this. The community appreciates it for sure. The event is going to be amazing. 2 weeks after, so end of April, looking back at the conference, what would be the biggest metric of success for you personally?
And this might sound a little bit strange, but I think a lot of the talks people will probably be able to pick them up later. Mm-hmm. So for me, the personal goal has been the more money we raise, the better. We kind of have a goal, but and then we have a stretch goal. So it's going to be interesting if we can get somewhere close to that.
Well, that's good, because that for me, that's a metric that reflects the community side of it, right? Like, of people coming together, realizing that we can do something positive as a community to support our larger community, right? So that's a fantastic way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think obviously the number of people that will come and watch, that's cool, but to be that is probably like a vanity metric. What really counts is that we can kind of donate and kind of help the people in need. So that's what got me on board on doing this as well. So.
Well, and I think given the all-star roster you've got lined up for speakers, the fact that people are going to come and consume the content is just a given. So it's nice to have that human side as the metric. So with that, Patrick, thank you for taking the time. This has been an amazing discussion for me. Hopefully the audience has enjoyed it. Again, for everybody watching at home, follow Patrick on social. That'll be in the show notes as well. But please support All the Talks conference on April 15th. We've got that link. Obviously, it's allthetalks.online, assuming that works for you. Thank you, Patrick. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Mark, for having me. It was a fun way to end my day, so I appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you. Follow